Imagine a single shaft of northern light falling through a small mullioned window and turning ordinary dust into gold. Imagine a woman, turned in three-quarter profile, who seems to breathe on the canvas. That compressed, quiet astonishment is Johannes Vermeer. In a life that produced only about 35 attributed paintings, he taught painting a new vocabulary: stillness as drama, the domestic as cathedral. You know the girl with a pearl earring, a trony, a character study rather than a portrait, and the milkmaid, where bread, milk, and sunlight become almost holy. Think of the art of painting, a meditation on the act of making and of standing for a moment on the rooftops of Delft in view of Delft, where a city becomes a sky-skirting ribbon. Or consider the little street, where a small corner of urban life holds the weight of centuries. Over the next 8.5 minutes, we'll move from the cradle of Delft to the alchemy of Vermeer's technique, from his handful of masterpieces to the puzzles and passions that keep scholars awake at night. Let's begin. Biographical passage: Johannes Vermeer, Life and Family. Born in Delft in 1632 and baptized there, Vermeer lived most of his life in that modest Dutch town. Records are sparse, but the outline is clear. A member of a Catholic family in a largely Protestant city, a young man who trained and worked in Delft's artistic community. He likely studied under Karel Fabricius or in workshops influenced by him. Scholars say this is plausible, but not certain. And he joined the Delft Guild of St. Luke in the 1650s. In 1653, he married Catharina Bolnes and soon took on the roles of husband, father, and running a small household that would swell with children. Family obligations and local commissions shaped his output. He painted slowly, carefully, balancing art and commerce. That balance, of domestic responsibilities, of faith and civic life, is threaded through his interiors. Even without a detailed portrait of the man himself, the paintings read like a biography: luminous rooms, measured gestures, the hush of an ordinary day rendered extraordinary. Vermeer's catalog is small but ruthlessly original. The Milkmaid, not a literal maid serving milk, but a study of concentration, turns a kitchen scene into a study of texture. Coarse bread, gleaming jug, the cool metal of a basin, all held in a persistent, steady light. Girl with a pearl earring is a trony. Trony means an expressive face or character study, not a commissioned likeness, yet it has become one of the most intimate images in Western art. A head turned toward us in an impossible private moment. The art of painting, sometimes called the allegory of painting, is both a self-reflection and a stage, with a painter, a model, and the idea of history laid out in cloth, map, and costume. View of Delft is rare among Vermeer's works as a cityscape. Its luminous atmosphere shows his obsession with light and optical effects. Woman holding a balance balances worldly goods and spiritual weight in a moment of private reckoning. What unites these works is Vermeer's quiet precision, a tightly composed frame, simplified geometry, and a turned inward stillness. He composes like a musician: restraint, timing, and a single melodic light across everything. Vermeer's turning points are domestic and logistical rather than theatrical. Marriage and family responsibilities in the 1650s coincided with his formal recognition in Delft's Guild of St. Luke. A crucial practical turn was the acquisition of patrons. At some point in his career, a local patron, likely Peter van Ryven, according to estate lists scholars study cautiously, began buying his work and helped sustain him. Another pivot was a growing attention to the map and globe imagery in several interiors, suggesting an interest in the wider world even as his work tightened inward. Curiosity. One of the puzzles art historians love is how a man in a provincial town learned to paint light with such urban sophistication. Some say he studied prints, travels of other artists, or the optical devices circulating in the Netherlands. These quiet choices: who he married, whom he sold to, what objects he kept in his studio, shaped the slow, intense path of an artist working in a very local setting, but creating images with universal reach. Vermeer's technique reads like a laboratory for light. He worked in oil on canvas or panel, often building from a restrained underpainting and layering glazes. Translucent layers of paint that let light pass through and reflect back, to achieve a depth of color. He favored a limited, economical palette: lead tin yellow, earth pigments, and ultramarine made from lapis lazuli for those luminous blues, a pigment so costly it was reserved for important passages. A recurring technical question is the camera obscura, an optical device that projects an image onto a surface. Many scholars argue Vermeer likely used an optical aid to study the fall of light and halation, the soft blurring of highlights, though we can only say it's often suggested, not proved. He applied paint with small brushes and sometimes left pinpoint highlights, a technique called pointillé, and occasionally used subtle impasto. Impasto means thicker paint built up to catch light in the brightest gleams. Look closely at a detail of the Milkmaid, the woven basket, the glint on the metal, the pearl. These are the fingerprints of craft and patient observation. Vermeer returns again and again to interiors, to women at windows, to maps on walls and instruments on tables. Domestic life becomes a theater for moral and pictorial inquiry. Is the woman weighing pearls enacting a moral scale between vanity and virtue? Is the letter being read evidence of longing, fidelity, or commerce? Instruments, the globe, the map, the painter's easel, gesture toward knowledge, travel, and the construction of meaning. Light in Vermeer is more than illumination. It is the subject. It separates planes, reveals textures, and like a soft breath, animates silence. His allegorical works, such as Allegory of Faith, layer religious symbolism with everyday objects, asking viewers to read both the obvious and the hidden. Curiosity. Scholars still debate whether some domestic props were moral reminders or simply fashionable accoutrements. Another surprising note, Vermeer sometimes painted expensive blue robes using real ultramarine, a luxury that tells us where he wanted the eye to rest. In Vermeer's lifetime, he was known locally, but never a superstar. After his death in 1675, his work receded into the archives, misattributed or overlooked. The great 19th-century rediscovery, led by critics like Théophile Thoré-Berger, recast Vermeer as a master of light and interior life. Since then, controversies have clustered around attribution. Only about 35 works are widely accepted as his, and around method. Did he use a camera obscura? Did he employ assistants? Some attributions have been revised. New technical imaging sometimes adds proof, sometimes more questions. Curiosity. At one point, an entire painting thought to be a copy or fake turned out, with pigment analysis and X-rays, to contain an original layer beneath. Another curiosity. Because he painted slowly and sold intermittently, Vermeer sometimes worked on commissions that passed between buyers, making provenance a detective story. The debates continue, and that uncertainty is part of his modern fascination. Vermeer's influence arrived late but deep. 19th-century realists and 20th-century filmmakers found in his stillness a new standard for portraying the interior mind. The girl with a pearl earring entered popular culture in novels and film, and her gaze became shorthand for mystery and intimacy. Painters study his handling of color relations and his patient building of light. Conservators study his ground layers and pigments. Curiosity. Vermeer's small output makes each painting a landmark. Entire careers of scholarship can orbit a single work. His quiet revolution reshaped expectations about genre painting, that small domestic scenes could hold philosophical weight. Today, photographers and cinematographers borrow his compositions. A single window, a side-lit face, a rectangle of light acting as a character. In that way, Vermeer did not just paint light, he exported a way of seeing. A few quick curiosities to savor. 1. The total catalog of Vermeer is tiny, roughly 35 paintings, which makes each work feel like a rare jewel. 2. The girl with a pearl earring is a trony, meaning it's an expressive study rather than a portrait, which explains her theatrical turban and costume. 3. His use of ultramarine made some blues fiendishly expensive. He spent money where the light demanded it. 4. Vermeer's family life was complicated. Several children, rising debts, and a small art market in Delft, everyday pressures that pressurize genius into peculiar shapes. And finally, 5. Scholarly detective work continues. X-rays sometimes find pentimenti, or changes in composition, revealing an artist's thinking in paint. These small facts add up to the larger mystery. A modest life, enormous vision. If Vermeer's art is a whisper, it is nonetheless the whisper that changes a room. His canvases teach patience. To look is to linger, to notice the curl of a sheet, the sheen on a pearl, the way light weighs on a map. He turned the domestic into the sacred, painted silence into a scene, and made viewers into conspirators privy to a private hour. Today, when we stand before a woman holding a balance or the geographer, we watch people who seem to be thinking, and in their thinking we find ourselves. Vermeer did not scatter his miracles widely. He concentrated them, painting a handful of windows onto human life. That concentration is his gift, not the volume of work, but the depth. In the hush after the painting, the light lingers, and so does the artist. Johannes Vermeer, painter of interiors, painter of light, painter of the slow miracles that happen every day.